Jack had never imagined his life would bring him to a place like this. The neon lights flickered above, casting an eerie glow over the crowded, dimly lit nightclub on the alien planet Zelon. Humans were rare in these parts, and the Zelonian nightlife was something to behold. Alien species from across the galaxy mingled with one another, lost in their own worlds, enjoying a night out like no other. Yet there Jack was, a lone human in the heart of a strange city far from Earth. He had come to Zelon looking for something to break the monotony of his life back home. What exactly, he wasn't sure. Maybe adventure, maybe freedom. Whatever it was here, and he knew it. The club was alive with energy. Alien dancers glided across the stage, each one more mesmerizing than the last, their skin glowing with strange colors, their bodies moving in ways Jack had never seen before. But despite the beautiful displays around him, one dancer stood out. She was unlike anyone Jack had ever seen. Her name was Alara, and the moment she stepped on stage, the world seemed to stop. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, her eyes a hypnotic shade of purple that seemed to pierce through him. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, and the crowd seemed to sway to her rhythm without question. As she danced, Alara's eyes met Jack's, locking with his in a way that felt as though she was seeing straight through him. His heart raced, and for the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't just the routine of his everyday life. It was excitement, anticipation, maybe even desire. Alara's performance was like nothing he had ever witnessed. Her body moved with a sensual grace, and the air around her seemed charged with something electric. Jack's eyes followed her every move, unable to look away. But then, just as the song ended, Alara's gaze remained fixed on him. A small smile played on her lips, a smile that felt like a secret invitation. Jack's throat went dry. It was as if she was asking him to join her in something unknown, something dangerous. Private room. A voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Turning, Jack saw one of the club's attendants standing next to him. The attendant was a Zelonian, short and covered in thick green scales. Jack didn't need to ask what was meant. The club was known for its private dances, and Alara was one of the highest-paid entertainers. But Jack wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He hadn't come here expecting this. But the moment Alara's gaze met his again, all of his doubts faded. He stood up, nodding, and followed the attendant to a secluded area in the back of the club. His heart thudded in his chest as the door to the private room slid open. And there, standing in the center of the dimly lit space, was Alara. She was even more stunning up close, the shimmering skin and perfect curves, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. "Jack," she said, her voice smooth and seductive. "I thought I saw something in you. Something different. I want to see if I'm right." He didn't know how to respond, but before he could speak, she moved closer, her scent intoxicating, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him forget everything except her. "Do you want this?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking for your soul, just your company, tonight." Jack felt a rush of heat in his chest. This was the moment, he realized. The moment where something unexpected could change everything. "I do," he said, his voice thick with desire. Alara's lips curved into a smile. "Good. Then let's see where this goes." The room seemed to close in around them as the music from the main club pulsed faintly in the background. For a brief moment, Jack was lost in the sensation of her touch, her warmth, her presence. It was unlike anything he had ever known. Alara was a mystery, a puzzle he wanted to solve, a danger he wanted to embrace. The dance began, slow and hypnotic, with Alara moving in ways that made Jack forget everything else. She was so close now, every movement of her body sending waves of heat through him. Her skin seemed to glow under the lights, her eyes never leaving his, drawing him in deeper with each passing second. Alara's fingers traced his arm lightly, sending shivers down his spine, as she whispered in his ear, "You're different from the others. I can tell. Jack swallowed hard. How? She chuckled softly, a sound that made his pulse quicken. You look at me like you're seeing me, not just a dancer. Most humans come in here to gawk, to touch, to take. But you're looking deeper. He didn't know what to say to that. All he knew was that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Alara wasn't just another alien dancer in a club on Zelon. She was something else, something that made him feel alive in a way he never had before. And in that moment, Jack realized that this was the beginning of something that could change both their worlds. But what would happen after tonight? Would it be just another fleeting encounter, or was this the start of something more? Jack didn't know yet, but he was ready to find out. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Jack. What had started as a casual, fleeting encounter in the dark nightclub on Zelon quickly evolved into something much deeper, more intense than he ever expected. Each night, Jack found himself back at the club, drawn to Alara. She had become a magnetic force in his life, and he couldn't resist her pull. Their affair was like nothing Jack had ever experienced. Alara wasn't just a beautiful dancer. She was an enigma, a mystery wrapped in silver skin and a quiet strength that intrigued him. Every time they met, it felt like they were peeling back layers of each other's lives, revealing secrets and desires that neither had ever shared with anyone before. They spent hours talking between dances, alone in quiet corners or hidden rooms of the club. Jack learned about Alara's life on Zelon. She wasn't just an entertainer. She had come from a prestigious family, one with wealth and influence, but she had chosen this path, dancing for strangers night after night. She spoke of her past with a mixture of pride and sorrow, her alien eyes betraying a lifetime of experiences that Jack could barely comprehend. Her world was nothing like his own, yet she seemed to understand him in ways no one else had. Alara was a woman of contradictions. Her public persona was one of flirtation and seduction, but in their private moments, Jack saw the real Alara, thoughtful, intelligent, and at times vulnerable. She would tell him stories of her childhood on Zelon, of her family's expectations, and the loneliness she felt being far from home. She confessed that her life in the nightclub was a choice, a way to escape the rigid rules of her society, to feel free for once. Jack shared his own stories too, although his were far simpler. He spoke of Earth, his small town, the steady but unremarkable life he had left behind. He had never felt truly connected to anyone there. Earth was a place full of ordinary lives, routine jobs, and expectations. Coming to Zelon had been his escape, but he hadn't expected to meet someone like Alara. Despite their differences, there was an undeniable connection between them. Each conversation, each touch deepened their bond. They began to meet outside the nightclub, finding secret spots on the planet to explore together. They went to quiet gardens, where the air was filled with the scent of alien flowers, and to shimmering lakes that seemed to glow under the twin moons of Zelon. It was in these moments that Jack saw a side of Alara that few ever did. She was not just the seductress of the stage. She was a woman searching for meaning, for something real in a world that often felt superficial and fleeting. But there were challenges too. As their relationship deepened, so did the risks. Zelon society wasn't kind to interspecies relationships, especially one between a human and an alien. Jack knew that if anyone found out about their secret meetings, it could cause problems, not just for him, but for Alara as well. The nightclub, where she made her living, was controlled by a network of powerful people who didn't take kindly to personal attachments interfering with business. The whispers around the club were becoming louder, and Jack began to feel the weight of their relationship pressing on him. One night, as they sat together in a quiet corner, Alara spoke the words that Jack had been avoiding. "We can't keep doing this forever, you know," she said softly, her eyes searching his. Jack felt a tightness in his chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean this, us," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What happens when someone finds out? You're human. I'm not. We can't just pretend like that doesn't matter." Jack swallowed hard. He hadn't really thought about the consequences before. Being with Alara felt so natural, so right, that he hadn't considered how dangerous it could be. "I don't care what people think," he said, trying to sound confident. "I care about you." Alara gave him a sad smile. "It's not that simple. You think they'll just let us be. The people I work for. They don't care about my happiness. They care about money, power. If they find out about us, they'll use it against me." Jack frowned. He hadn't realized just how high the stakes were for Alara. The more they talked, the clearer it became that their relationship was much more complicated than he'd thought. The next few days were tense. Jack could sense a shift in Alara. She seemed distant, as if weighing a decision she didn't want to make. He tried to reassure her, but deep down, he knew she was right. The world they were living in wasn't kind to people like them. He didn't belong here, and she wasn't really a part of his world either. But every time he saw her, every time their eyes met, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of certainty. He couldn't just walk away from her. The connection they shared was too powerful, too unique to let go of. As the days passed, they continued their secret affair, knowing the risks but unwilling to stop. There was something exhilarating about sneaking around, about having a secret that no one else could understand. Jack found himself falling deeper into the fantasy of what they had, even though he knew it couldn't last forever. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. They would figure out the future later, but for tonight, they had each other. And that was enough. Jack woke up to the sound of an alert on his communicator. He groggily reached over to turn it off, but something felt different. There was an unease in the air, a tension that had been building ever since he and Alara began seeing each other more openly. Something was wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the consequences of their secret affair were catching up to them. It had been weeks since they'd started meeting outside the nightclub. Their stolen moments together felt like a dream. Yet the dangers of their relationship, the risks they faced, were becoming more real every day. Jack had thought they could keep their connection hidden, that they could navigate the tension between them without anyone finding out. But he was wrong. The first sign that things were changing came when he met Alara that night. She seemed distant, more on edge than usual. Her eyes were filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. As she walked toward him in the dim light of the club, he noticed her glance around quickly, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "Is everything okay?" Jack asked, his voice low. "You seem off." Alara paused for a moment, biting her lip. She didn't immediately respond, and Jack felt the growing knot in his stomach. Something was wrong. "I need to talk to you," Alara said, her voice shaky. "It's about the club. My employer. They know." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean they know?" "They know about us," she replied quietly. "They've been watching. I don't know how, but they figured it out. I tried to be careful, but..." She trailed off, her expression pained. "I'm not safe anymore, Jack." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had always known that being with her was dangerous, but hearing it from her, hearing how serious it had become, made everything feel real. This wasn't just a fun, secret affair anymore. There were real consequences to what they were doing, consequences that neither of them could ignore. Jack clenched his fists. "What are we going to do? We can't just let them control us." Alara shook her head. "It's not that simple. My employer, the people who run this place, they're not just going to let us walk away. They've built their entire empire on the backs of people like me. If they find out I've been seeing a human, it could ruin everything." Jack's mind raced. He had heard rumors about the underworld of Zelon, about the corrupt officials, and powerful crime syndicates that controlled everything, from the nightlife to the very streets. He hadn't fully understood the danger Alara was in until now. She wasn't just a dancer. She was a part of something much bigger, and much more dangerous. "Alara, we have to leave. We can't stay here," Jack said, his voice firm. We'll go somewhere far away, somewhere safe. We'll start fresh." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear, but there was something else in her gaze. A sadness, a sense of inevitability. "You don't get it, Jack. I can't just leave. If I run, they'll find me. And they won't just hurt me. They'll come after you too. They'll destroy you, just to make an example." Jack's stomach turned. He didn't care what they did to him. But Alara, she was everything he had come to care about. And the thought of her being hurt because of him was unbearable. "We need a plan," he said, his voice steady despite the panic rising inside him. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after us." Alara nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I know, but I don't have the power to fight them. Not here. Not alone." There was a long silence between them as the weight of the situation settled over them both. Jack had never felt so helpless. He had never been in a situation like this, where the stakes were so high, where every decision could mean life or death. Alara stood up suddenly, as if a new thought had struck her. "There is one person," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "One person who might be able to help us. But it's risky." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "A former ally of mine," she said, looking around nervously as if the walls might have ears. "His name is Zorik. He's a smuggler, has his own ship. He's someone who can get us out of here. But," she hesitated, "he's not exactly the most trustworthy person. If we go to him, we'll have to do things his way. And that could mean getting involved in some shady business." Jack thought for a moment. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. "What do we have to lose?" Alara met his eyes. "Everything." The next few days were a blur of preparations. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. Zelon was becoming more dangerous for them by the hour. The club's security was tightening, and Jack could feel the eyes of the people around him. Those who worked for the syndicate, watching him more closely than before. Their secret was out, and they were no longer safe. Alara and Jack met with Zorik in a shady corner of the spaceport, where the darker side of Zelon society gathered. The smuggler was a tall, lean man with cold, calculating eyes. He wore a long, black coat, and his fingers were covered in strange rings, each one signifying a different criminal alliance. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You want out?" he asked, his voice rough. "It's going to cost you. A lot." "We don't have much," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. Zorik's lips curled into a smirk. "Then I guess we'll find another way to pay." Jack and Alara sat across from Zorik in the dimly lit corner of the spaceport. The air was thick with the scent of fuel and machinery, the hum of ships preparing for takeoff echoing in the distance. Zorik's eyes glinted with an unsettling coldness, sizing them up with a look that made Jack feel like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. "We're not here for a tour of your ships," Jack said, trying to hide the unease in his voice. "We need your help to get out of Zelon." Zorik leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied them both. "I've heard about you too," he said, his tone almost amused. "The human who's been playing with fire, and the Zelonian dancer who thinks she can escape the chains of her own people. You're a bold pair, I'll give you that." Jack's jaw tightened. "We're not here for your judgment, Zorik. We just need a way out. We'll pay you, whatever it takes." The smuggler chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "That's where you're wrong. You think you can pay me off. Sure, money talks. But when it comes to getting out of Zelon, it's not about money. It's about power, connections, and favors. And right now, you two don't have much to offer." Jack and Alara exchanged a glance. They had known the risks of going to someone like Zorik. The man wasn't known for his kindness, and asking for help from someone in his line of work was never easy. But they didn't have a choice. Zorik was their only way out. "Then what do you want from us?" Alara asked, her voice steady but laced with a hint of frustration. Zorik leaned forward, his grin widening. "It's simple," he said. I need you to do something for me first. A small job, nothing too risky, but something that'll prove you're worth the trouble. If you pull it off, I'll get you out of here. But if you fail—" His eyes glinted, and his words hung in the air like a warning. "Well, let's just say you'll regret it." Jack's heart pounded. He knew that the moment they agreed to this deal, they'd be tied to Zorik, and there would be no turning back. "What's the job?" Zorik leaned back, folding his arms. "There's a shipment coming in. Illegal tech, nothing too big, just a few crates of weapons. The deal's supposed to happen in a few days, and I need you to intercept it before it reaches its buyers. The tech is valuable, and I want it for myself." Jack's mind raced. He wasn't a criminal, and the idea of stealing weapons didn't sit well with him. But he also knew that they couldn't afford to say no. Without Zorik's help, they would be trapped on Zalon, unable to escape the deadly people who were closing in on them. Alara looked at Jack, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "If we do this, you'll help us get off this planet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zorik nodded. "That's the deal. You do this for me, and I'll get you out. But if you fail or try to double-cross me, I'll make sure you never see the stars again." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Jack felt the cold chill of fear seep into his bones. They had no choice. They needed to trust Zorik, even if he was a criminal with a reputation for cruelty. "Fine," Jack said, his voice firm. "We'll do it, but we need to move fast." Zorik's grin returned. "Good. You've got the guts after all. I like that." The plan was simple but dangerous. Jack and Alara would intercept the shipment on its way to the buyers, a group of criminals who had ties to the syndicate that controlled Zalon's underworld. The shipment was heavily guarded, but Zorik assured them that with the right timing and the element of surprise, they could pull it off. The stakes were high. If they failed, they wouldn't just be running from the syndicate. They'd be running for their lives. In the days that followed, Jack and Alara prepared for the job. Zorik gave them the coordinates of where the shipment would be dropped off, along with a list of the weapons they needed to secure. The plan was to take out the guards quietly, disable the transport, and grab the crates. The whole operation would take less than an hour, with enough time to escape before anyone realized what had happened. Alara trained with Jack, teaching him how to handle the blasters and gadgets they would need. She had a natural talent for these things, a result of her time in the nightclub's underground world. Jack, on the other hand, struggled with the weapons but was determined to learn. He knew that this mission was their only chance to escape the danger that was closing in around them. As the day of the heist approached, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Zorik was a dangerous man, and Jack wasn't sure if he could trust him. But there was no turning back now. If they didn't succeed, they would lose their chance at freedom forever. The night before the mission, Jack and Alara sat together in their small, dimly lit room. The tension between them was palpable. They knew the risks, but neither of them was ready to give up. Not now. Not when they had come so far. "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow," Jack said, his voice low. "But whatever happens, I'm glad we're doing this together." Alara smiled softly, her hand finding his. "We don't have to worry about tomorrow. We'll make it through this, Jack. We have to." As they sat in silence, the weight of the coming mission pressed heavily on them. Tomorrow would decide their fate. They could either walk away free, or they could end up caught in a trap that would destroy them both. The thought lingered in the air, but neither of them spoke it aloud. They couldn't afford to dwell on the fear. They had to believe in each other. They had no choice but to trust that they would make it through. The night of the heist arrived, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Jack and Alara stood together in the shadows of an alleyway, watching the transport vehicles in the distance. The mission was simple, or so they thought. Intercept the shipment, steal the crates, and vanish before anyone realized what had happened. But the deeper they got into the plan, the more they felt the weight of the danger pressing down on them. Jack's heart raced as he checked his gear once again. He had a blaster strapped to his side, a few high-tech tools that Alara had shown him how to use, and his communicator, which he kept on silent. He couldn't afford to be distracted. He looked over at Alara, who seemed calm and collected, but he knew her well enough to see the tension in her eyes. She was scared, just like he was, but she was a master at hiding it. "You ready?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara nodded, her expression unreadable. "We've gone over the plan 100 times. We know what we need to do. Stick to the timing, and we'll be fine." Jack wasn't so sure, but he didn't voice his doubts. They couldn't afford to hesitate now. This was their only chance. The transport vehicle was due in less than 20 minutes. Zorik had given them detailed instructions on where and when to strike. But the more Jack thought about it, the more he realized how dangerous it was. The guards would be well armed, and the shipment was too important to the Syndicate to be taken lightly. If anything went wrong, they'd be dead before they could escape. "Let's move," Alara said, breaking his train of thought. They stepped out from the shadows, moving quickly but quietly toward the drop-off point. The area was quiet, the only sound the hum of distant machinery and the occasional footstep of guards patrolling the area. Jack kept his head down, his hand on the blaster. The plan was to disable the transport vehicle systems first, something Alara had taught him how to do with a small handheld device. Once that was done, they would take out the guards, grab the crates, and leave. Easy, right? But as they neared the transport, Jack saw something that made his stomach drop. There were more guards than he expected. Zorik had said the shipment would be lightly protected, but there were at least 6 armed men standing near the vehicle, speaking in low voices. Alara must have noticed his reaction because she squeezed his arm gently. "It's okay. We can handle this. Stick to the plan." Jack nodded, trying to steady his breathing. "Right. Stick to the plan." They crouched behind a large cargo crate, waiting for the right moment. The guards were too far away to hear them, but Jack didn't want to risk making a sound. He could feel his palms sweating as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the transport vehicle rumbled into view, its engines growling as it slowed to a stop. The guards stepped forward, moving to open the cargo doors. It was their chance. Alara moved first, darting out from behind the crate with lightning speed. She held the device in her hand, already activating it. Jack followed close behind, keeping his head low and his blaster ready. They didn't have much time. The guards would start moving once the vehicle was open, and they needed to act fast. Alara was quick, her fingers flying over the device as she pointed it at the transport. A small red light blinked, and then nothing. The transport was down. The guards didn't seem to notice at first, too distracted by the opening doors. That was their opening. Jack and Alara moved in, taking out the 2 guards closest to the vehicle before they had a chance to react. Jack felt a rush of adrenaline as he fired his blaster, the stunned shot hitting one guard square in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other guard didn't even have time to draw his weapon before Alara knocked him out cold with a swift blow to the head. But then everything went wrong. A loud alarm blared from the transport, and suddenly, there were more guards. Jack's heart leaped into his throat as he realized that the entire area was being alerted. "We need to hurry," he shouted. Alara was already moving, grabbing one of the crates and tossing it to Jack. "Get it to the ship. I'll cover you." He didn't hesitate. With the crate in his arms, he sprinted toward the designated escape route, the blaster still clutched in his hand. Alara was right behind him, firing at the guards who were closing in. The sound of blaster fire filled the air, a chaotic symphony of danger. As Jack rounded the corner, he spotted Zorik's ship in the distance, the sleek black silhouette of the vessel standing out against the dim lights of the spaceport. They weren't far from safety, but there were still too many guards between them and the ship. Jack's legs burned as he pushed himself harder, dodging blaster fire and leaping over obstacles in his path. He could hear the footsteps of the guards behind him, getting closer by the second. Just as he reached the entrance to the ship, He heard a loud crack. Alara's scream cut through the air. "No," Jack shouted, turning to see her struggling with one of the guards. She had been caught behind, trying to cover him, and now she was being held at gunpoint. Jack didn't think. He couldn't. He turned back toward her, his blaster raised, and aimed directly at the guard holding her. He fired without hesitation. The shot hit the guard in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. But before Jack could reach Alara, another guard appeared, blocking his way. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion as Jack took aim again, this time aiming for the second guard. The shot rang out, and the guard fell to the ground, giving Jack the opening he needed. He rushed to Alara's side, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her into the ship. "We're not done yet," Alara said, breathless, but there was a look of determination in her eyes. "Let's get out of here." Jack nodded, his heart still racing as he helped her inside. The ship's doors slammed shut behind them, and Zorik's voice came over the intercom. "Hold on tight. We're leaving Zelon." With a loud roar, the ship lifted off, and Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had made it, but Jack knew this was just the beginning. There was still a long road ahead of them. They had stolen from the wrong people, and now they were being hunted. But for the first time in weeks, Jack felt a spark of hope. They had survived. And maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. The ship roared through the dark expanse of space, the stars streaking by in a blur as it left the planet Zalon far behind. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Jack sat in the cockpit, hands tightly gripping the controls, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. The heist had gone terribly wrong, but somehow they'd made it. They were out, or at least they had thought they were. "Zalon is behind us, but that doesn't mean we're safe." Zorik's voice crackled over the comms, his tone as cold as ever. "You two didn't just steal weapons. You've pissed off some very dangerous people. I hope you know what you're in for." Jack shot a glance at Alara, who was sitting in the small lounge area, her back against the wall. Her expression was hard to read, but her eyes were narrowed, a look of concentration and worry on her face. She had been quiet since they'd escaped, and Jack could tell that the weight of the situation was settling on her, just like it was on him. "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his voice low. "You said we'd be safe once we got out of Zelon." Zorik let out a dry laugh. "You think the Syndicate will just let you walk away? They'll hunt you down, and they won't stop until they find you. And trust me, they have resources you wouldn't believe." Alara stood up suddenly, pacing the small room as she spoke, her voice tinged with frustration. "We didn't have a choice, Zorik. If we hadn't stolen the weapons, we would have been killed. You knew that." "I knew you'd be desperate," Zorik replied sharply. "But desperation doesn't change the fact that you're now a target. You're lucky I'm helping you at all." Jack's blood ran cold. He knew Zorik was right. The Syndicate didn't let anyone go, especially not people who stole from them. The walls of their world were closing in on them, and the only thing they had left was Zorik's ship and the hope that it could carry them far enough away to escape the clutches of their enemies. "We need a plan," Jack said, his voice firm. "We can't just keep running. They'll catch us eventually." Alara stopped pacing, looking at Jack. "We have to get to a place where they can't follow us. Somewhere off the grid, where no one knows who we are." Zorik's voice came through the comms again. "There is such a place. I know a system, far from the reach of Zalon's Syndicate. But getting there won't be easy. The moment they realize you're on the run, they'll send everything they have after you. You'll be lucky to make it out alive." Jack didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. If there's a chance to escape, we take it." Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and determination. "We have to trust him. It's the only way." Zorik gave a dry chuckle. "Trust. That's not the word I'd use. But if you want to live, I suggest you keep your head down and follow my lead." Jack's grip on the controls tightened as he steered the ship toward the coordinates Zorik had sent. He knew this was a gamble. They were heading into uncharted space, where no one would come looking for them. But if the Syndicate had their eyes on them, it didn't matter where they went. They'd be hunted down. The ship flew silently through the void, the stars flickering like distant candles in the dark. Jack glanced at the sensors, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew they didn't have much time. If the Syndicate had any intelligence network at all, they'd know their ship was gone by now, and a hunt would begin. They were already running on borrowed time. "Zorik, are we being followed?" Jack asked, his voice tight with the strain of the situation. Zorik didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his tone was serious. "No sign yet, but that won't last long. The moment we hit the edge of Zalon's territory, they'll notice. You'll have to move quickly once we're in the outer system. Stay sharp." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the pressure settled heavily on him. He didn't want to show it, but he knew that this wasn't just about getting away. It was about surviving. The Syndicate wouldn't just kill them. They'd make sure they suffered first. He couldn't let that happen, not to him, and especially not to Alara. "How long until we reach the system?" Alara asked, her voice calm, but Jack could hear the underlying worry in her tone. "About 6 hours, Zorik replied. "You should rest. You'll need your strength for what's coming next." 6 hours. Jack didn't feel tired, not with everything on the line, but he knew Alara needed to rest. She hadn't slept much since they'd started running, and they'd need all their energy when they reached the system. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had no choice but to keep moving forward. "Come on," Jack said, looking over at her. "Let's get some sleep. We're not going to make it if we don't stay sharp." Alara gave him a small, tired smile. "You're right, but I don't think I'll be able to sleep." Jack walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Alara. We're in this together. We'll find a way." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for reassurance. "I hope you're right." The hours dragged on, and the silence in the ship was suffocating. The soft hum of the engines was the only sound, and every minute that passed felt like it was leading them closer to their inevitable fate. But Jack refused to let the fear take hold. They had come this far, and he wouldn't give up now. As the ship neared the outer edges of Zalon's space, the tension in the cockpit grew. Jack watched the sensors closely, his fingers hovering over the controls. This was it. They were entering the unknown, and there was no turning back. "Prepare yourselves," Zorik's voice crackled over the comms. "Once we hit the outer system, it's a free-for-all. Get ready to run. And remember, stay close. We can't afford to lose each other." Jack nodded, taking one last glance at Alara. Her face was determined, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. Jack knew they had to survive, not just for themselves, but for each other. The chase was just beginning, and it would take everything they had to make it out alive. The ship raced through the cold void of space, its engines roaring as it sped farther from the Zalon system. Jack's hands gripped the controls tightly, his mind focused, his eyes flicking constantly from the control panels to the dark expanse ahead. He could feel the weight of every passing second, knowing that the moment they crossed into the outer system, everything would change. There would be no more hiding, no more time to prepare. "We're almost there." Zorik's voice came through the comms, calm but with an edge of urgency. "Brace yourselves. Once we hit the outer system, the chase begins. It's going to get rough." Alara stood beside him, her face set in a determined expression. She was ready, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fists were clenched. She was scared, just like him, but she wasn't showing it. They both knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure they didn't get caught. "We'll be ready," Jack said, his voice steady even though his heart was pounding in his chest. He looked over at Alara, offering her a brief, reassuring smile. "We've come this far. We'll make it." Alara didn't respond, but she gave a small nod, her eyes scanning the ship's sensors. Jack could see her mind working, running through the scenarios. She was always thinking ahead, always planning. It was one of the things that made her so good at what she did. 6 hours, Zorik repeated, his voice a bit sharper this time. We have 6 hours to get to the drop zone. After that, the syndicate will know we're gone. They won't stop until they find you. You have to keep moving. Jack's grip on the controls tightened even more. He didn't like the sound of that, but he knew Zorik was right. This wasn't going to be easy. They were being hunted, and there was no way around it. The only thing they could do was keep running, hope that they stayed one step ahead, and pray that the outer system would offer them some kind of safe haven. We're almost there, Jack said, his voice low. Stay sharp, both of you. This is where it gets real. The ship began to tremble slightly as they crossed the boundary into the outer system. The stars outside the viewport grew more scattered, the familiar patterns of the Zolon system fading into the black. They were entering deep space now, where anything could happen. Get ready, Zorik's voice came over the comms once more. This is where it gets dangerous. You won't be alone for long. Just as Zorik finished speaking, the ship's sensors lit up, signaling an incoming signal. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was a tracking signal, one that only came from a ship that was very close by. He knew what that meant. They found us, Jack muttered, his voice tense. They're already here. Alara moved quickly, taking her place at the weapons console. They're not just tracking us, she said. They're closing in. Jack's fingers flew over the controls, sending the ship into a sharp turn. The stars outside twisted into streaks of light as the ship veered off course, desperately trying to shake off their pursuers. But Jack knew it wouldn't be enough. The syndicate had eyes everywhere. Can you lose them? Alara asked, her voice urgent as she scanned the monitors. I'm trying, Jack replied, his mind racing. He pushed the ship harder, sending it into a series of evasive maneuvers. But every time he thought they'd gained some distance, another signal blinked on the screen. The syndicate was everywhere. They were relentless. We can't outrun them forever, Zorik said. We'll have to make a stand. Jack's heart sank. A stand. That meant fighting, and he wasn't sure they had enough firepower to take on the syndicate. But there was no other option. If they didn't stop the pursuers, they'd never make it to safety. Get ready, Jack said to Alara, his voice grim. We're going to have to fight. Alara didn't hesitate. Just tell me when. Jack activated the ship's weapons system, watching as the targeting reticle blinked onto the screen. They were going to fight for their lives. He could hear the sound of blaster fire in his mind, the crunch of metal on metal, the rush of adrenaline. It was all too real now. The ship shuddered again, and the first enemy ship came into view, the sleek, black craft designed for speed and stealth. It was close, and Jack could see the guns on its hull primed and ready. On my mark, Jack shouted. He punched a button, launching a volley of missiles toward the enemy ship. The explosion lit up the dark void of space as the missiles made contact, but the enemy ship was quick, dodging and weaving as it returned fire. The impact of the first shot shook their ship violently, throwing both Jack and Alara against their seats. The lights flickered, and alarms blared as systems went into overload. Hold on, Jack yelled, gritting his teeth as he fought to regain control. He jerked the controls to the left, sending the ship into another evasive maneuver, narrowly avoiding another blast. Get the guns online. We can't keep dodging forever. Alara's hands flew across the controls, firing back at the enemy ship. The blaster shots hit their target, but the enemy ship wasn't done. It fired again, this time hitting the ship's wing. Jack felt a jolt, and the control panels began flashing warnings. Damn it, Jack cursed, trying to steady the ship as it spun out of control. The systems were failing, and they were losing precious time. We're not going to make it, Alara shouted, her voice tinged with panic as another round of shots exploded around them. "Jack, we need a plan." Jack's mind raced. He couldn't keep running. They had to fight, and they had to win. He glanced at Alara, her face filled with fear, but also determination. She wasn't going to let them go down without a fight. "Get ready," Jack said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "This is it. We're going to make a break for it. On my count. 3, 2. The enemy ship closed in, its guns aimed straight for them. 1. Jack slammed the throttle forward, pushing the ship into overdrive, and they rocketed into the dark expanse of space, ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot.